Hi, everybody. My name is Ethan Du Bois, and this is my oral presentation for exam one. This is a picture of a tiger salamander, which is an endangered species here in New Jersey. And this is a photo I took last winter. And we're going to get into discussing endangered threatened species, and more specifically here in New Jersey in a little bit. So the main point of this presentation is to discuss the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which has been presented to the House of Representatives and the Senate in two very similar but different bills. One of which was introduced to the House of Representatives in April 2021, the other which was introduced to the Senate in July of 2021. And both bills propose additional funding for federal, state, and tribal agencies for the implementation of conservation efforts for non-game species. And this will be done so without raising any taxes or creating new legislation. As you could imagine, both those factors would create significant oppositions. However, avoiding them also creates opposition because that money will need to be pulled from another fund. And right now, there's kind of no answers, as far as I know, on how that money will be replaced, or if it will be, or what they plan to do about that situation. So although it's good that it won't be coming out of our pockets or someone's pockets, it certainly will need to be accounted for in some way, as it's a pretty significant amount of money. However, if it's passed, it'll further wildlife professionals to manage populations how they see fit in their individual territories. And the goal is to provide, the overall goal is to provide additional funding where needed to prevent additional species from becoming threatened and endangered. Similar bills have been presented to three past Congresses, however, all of which were denied for reasons we're going to get into. So the bill, as I mentioned, would continue to put emphasis towards protecting species that are threatened and endangered, but it would also put emphasis on species that have not been listed but may be headed that way. States would be given no more than 5%, but no less than 1% of the total amount of funds in which they can allocate how they feel necessary. In reading a few different estimates, one that stood out to me was a state like Wisconsin would go from having 900,000 annual contribution to about 19 million. And initially, when I read this, I thought, is that too much? One individual who was running for office stated that this was the largest and most significant investment in wildlife and conservation in a generation. And I think that's true, 100%. But when you think about if it's too much and reading different reasons on why the previous bills haven't passed, one of the reasons was that in 2019, estimates showed that even this much money would not be enough to recover our endangered species here in the US. So we're kind of biting off this chunk of species that aren't yet listed, and we can't even solve this problem. Why put so much money into it when it's not possible to solve that problem? So that's one thought, and that'll definitely have to be addressed in this bill, as I'm sure it is. One of the sponsors of this bill is Senator Martin Heinrich, who became a senator of New Mexico in 2013. He's an avid outdoorsman and advocate for public land. His focuses lie in creating jobs, confronting climate change, advocating for working families and Native Americans, protecting and increasing New Mexico's public lands, among many others. Kind of the thing that stood out to me most in reading about Senator Heinrich was that over his career, he's added 334,000 acres to New Mexico's wilderness. And I haven't done any research on, what other people have, but this is pretty astonishing of a number to me. I think it's insane that I've never really heard about this before, and I thought it was really impressive, something really special that he's done for his home state of New Mexico. And I thought, who better to describe what this bill is meaning to the citizens of the US than him? And he described it as, after all, our children deserve to inherit the full breadth of American wildlife, from bumblebees to bison, that we know today. this legislation makes that possible. And I really think that's a great way to put it, because the direction we're going really leads us to a world where our children don't get to see, a fair number of the species that we have here today. So the bill has two different versions, one in the Senate and one in the House. And overall, both bills are very, very similar, and they both have the same goals, just providing additional funding for conservation. However, I read a few different numbers, and I couldn't find significant scientific research to back up exactly what the number differences were. But it appeared like the bills allocated and gave different amounts of money to be given out annually, and that's where they differed. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about legislation becoming a law. And this all begins when an idea is thought about by a senator or a person of the House, which is then drafted into a bill. The bill is introduced in one or both of the houses, and it's sent to the committee it pertains to. This is where most bills die. Once it's passed by the committee, the bill is sent to the floor. If it's passed at the floor, it's sent to the other house, and it proceeds through this entire process again. As you can imagine, this is a really long process. But then if it is passed by the other house, any differences or discrepancies must be settled before it is sent to the president for a signature, and that's the final step. Once that is signed, it becomes a bill, and it's able to be enacted on. So for work, I deal with a lot of threatened and endangered species. And thinking about what RAWA could do for New Jersey was, something that I really enjoyed and was hopeful about, because I don't think a lot of people realize that although New Jersey is so densely populated, it's still home to 16 species that are federally listed. And these are species that, the federal government decides are kind of the most important. Or not necessarily the most important, but the most endangered and the most, the ones that have the most severe situation. So I think that this bill and additional funding could provide significant impacts to those species, but I think it could also provide to species of special concern and species that we don't really think about and that hold no regulatory rate or no regulatory weight, like the box turtle or the Cooper's hawk. Emphasis in New Jersey could, I think, be put on recovering and protecting through habitat management and habitat enhancement for species like the bog turtle and the Indiana bat. In South Jersey, we once had a pretty stable population of bog turtles that my dad actually discovered in the year 2000. And since then, due to factors such as poaching, habitat fragmentation, habitat degradation, we've really minimized into just a few good sites and populations, which, because of the fecundity and life history traits of the bog turtle, becomes really detrimental and worrisome for the success of the population moving forward. Likewise, North Jersey was once a stronghold for Indiana bat, which is, a bat that's significantly been just struggling following white nose syndrome. And here in New Jersey, it's no different than anywhere else in the Northeast. And I think doing what we can in North Jersey to protect and enhance some of this habitat for the Indiana bat could really benefit them as a whole and hopefully bring numbers back to what they once were. So state and tribal wildlife grants support species of greatest concern or tribal importance in territories. And most recently, New Jersey was given $350,000 to develop Change, Connecting Habitats Across New Jersey, which is an interactive mapping tool that provides insight on important critical habitats for connectivity for different species. And this is something I use for work relatively often with the utility companies and whatnot. We use this to determine whether their lines and right of ways go through, a piece of this habitat that is going to be regulated or whatnot. So overall, I think that the Recovering America's Wildlife Act could be extremely beneficial in New Jersey, along with the every state in the U.S. And I really hope, I can do what I can in my part to help make it come to fruition. Thank you.